as I moved into entrepreneurship, when I was about to be on Shark Tank and got a notice from the patent office that I was getting a final rejection letter, and I was like, oh God, this is going to jeopardize everything. All these different ups and downs and turmoils that I faced building Flipstick, if it hadn't have been for me going through all of that and really feeling very low and recovering from it, I probably would have given up many, many times. But because I had come out of that deep depression and anxiety state, I knew that I have the tools within me to do it again.
Hello, I'm Bruce Berman, the host of Understanding IP Matters, the critically acclaimed podcast series that provides leading innovators and experts a space to share their IP story. Learn firsthand about the strengths and weaknesses of copyrights, patents, trademarks, and trade secrets as they adapt to an AI-driven world. This is our 4th season. Life is mostly about overcoming obstacles. So is inventing. When it comes to getting to the next level, my guest today is as determined as anybody, including his famous mentors. His name is Akeem Shannon, and I'm thrilled to have him on the show today. Akeem is not your typical Shark Tank contestant. After beating out 40,000 competitors to land a spot in the top 200 show finalists, he was cut. Devastated, he didn't let that stop him from appearing on Shark Tank with the help of Snoop Dogg, who love his product and his energy. Flipstick Inc. is Akeem's company that makes a gravity-defying cell phone attachment he invented with space-age adhesives. He was able to scale the business in just 3 years to over $10 million in sales. Akeem's website reads, entrepreneur, motivational speaker, and featured in Inc. magazine's top 50 fast-growing consumer product companies of 2023. At 15, Akeem was bullied for being different. At 19, he flunked out of college. At 23, he was committed to a psychiatric hospital. And at 28, he appeared on Shark Tank and convinced Snoop he was a branding genius. Today, he teaches others how to overcome obstacles he once thought were insurmountable. Good morning, Akeem. I'm really thrilled to have you on the podcast today. Where are you speaking from?
Good morning, Bruce. I am in sunny St. Louis, Missouri.
Okay, good. Not too humid, I hope.
Very, very humid, actually.
Okay, that's St. Louis. Let's start here. Let's begin at the beginning. You received a full academic scholarship to study chemical engineering at Howard University. But that did not go so well. What happened there?
One, I shouldn't have been in chemical engineering, if I'm being honest. I remember deciding on my major. At first, I had chose business, which, would have probably made sense given the path that I've taken in life. But I was reading an article and it was telling you, okay, here are all the top paying degrees that are coming up in the next few years. And it was all engineering degrees. And so I picked the one at the very top, which was chemical engineering at the time. And that was a big mistake because, see, I hated chemistry.
That'll do it.
That'll do it. And, when I got into school, I remember I took organic chemistry 1 and it just kicked my behind. It was so tough. I had no enjoyment or passion for it. And in fact, what I really enjoyed was being a part of the accounting club, because the accounting club got to go to New York City and go to all the big banks. And, that for me was fun. And, I guess I just didn't realize at the time that it's okay for me to change my mind. I could have just switched and said, you know what, this isn't for me. I want to do something different. But to me, that felt like failure. And I didn't want to admit that I had failed. So I stuck with it, ultimately, of course, leading to a much bigger failure.
You said your first post-college lesson was learning to sell. That's something they don't teach in business school typically. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so when I came home, my parents were furious. I'm an only child. Here I've lost a scholarship. I'm starting over. But, I went to a pretty prestigious high school. Some of the kids at our school went to Harvard and Princeton, and I just didn't want to be this deadbeat kid, a real failure. So I made myself this promise that by the time my friends graduated college, I wanted to be making more than the average college graduate. And so I ended up getting a job working at a Sprint store. And I figured, I said, hey, it only pays $10 an hour, but I'll get to have cell phones. I love smartphones at the time. I didn't have the phone that I wanted. So I said, okay, great. I'll go and I'll work here. And man, one of the best decisions I ever made, because I got to really cut my teeth learning, okay, how do you talk to people to get them to make a decision that benefits both them and you. And so while I was there, I pretty quickly became the top sales rep at our store and then at our region. And then it just kept going. And eventually, I get recruited to go work at Verizon in a call center. And at Verizon, I wasn't selling cell phones, but rather their FiOS service. So all my folks on the East and West Coast will know what I'm talking about. And so I was selling FiOS to consumer and business customers. And there, not only did I become, one of the top salespeople in the entire company, but I end up winning this major sales competition called Verizon Rockstar, which essentially was a pitch competition who in the company of Verizon could pitch Verizon products and services better than anyone else. And I went out of every single person in the entire company down at the Fontainebleau Hotel in Miami. And for me, it was this incredible experience being on stage, and there was actual rock stars that were there that performed, and I'm meeting all these executives, and man, it was so exhilarating for me. And in that moment, and at that time, I went from $10 an hour to making nearly $100,000 a year, saved up $100,000 in cash, and I had just felt like I had recovered from the biggest failure of my entire life. And it showed me like, man, of course I'm good at the sales things, but just because you fail doesn't make you a failure. It's only when you fail and give up that you don't have the opportunity to level up.
So in a few years, you became the number one sales executive at two Fortune 500 companies. I'm guessing T-Mobile and Verizon you're referring to. And you talked about how that happened. Now, you launched the product Flipstick on Kickstarter in 2018. How did that happen? And in the next few years, it became an incredible journey of ups and downs. What were the biggest obstacles and what motivated you to launch that product?
So, after Verizon, I ended up working at Square, one of the largest fintech companies in the world. And, I always wanted to work for a tech startup. I loved working there. But at this point, it had been, several years in sales, and I just became disenchanted. I didn't want to sell things for other people anymore because I knew that the equation always favored them more than it did me, when it came to my pocketbook. And so I told my boss at the time, I was like, I got to go do my own thing. I'd been working with entrepreneurs at Square. And so I'm like, look, if these people can do it, I can do it too. And my boss had given me a book called The Alchemist when I left because he knew I had some money saved up. He didn't want me going, trekking across Asia or something, just, visiting temples. So he's like, I want you to go do something. And I read this book after much delay. I finally read the book and it just opened my eyes up to the possibility that my treasure was out there waiting for me, but I had to have the vision to go and get it and find it. And it just so happened that right after I read this book, I get a late night phone call from my uncle, who is an engineer at NASA for the past 30 years. And it's late, it's like 3 o'clock in the morning. And he's telling me about this project he was working on for the Space Launch System and how he was going to use this NASA-based adhesive in this project. And it was a reusable adhesive based off the feet of geckos. And for me, I had just moved and mounted my TV on the wall. Took me a embarrassingly long time to mount the TV. And I was just like, man, I could have really used this magic NASA adhesive to mount my TV. And while I never mounted a TV with it, I did figure out a way to mount a tiny TV smartphone. And so when I was thinking about, okay, I've never ran a business, I've never launched a business, I don't know anything about engineering. Clearly, I failed out of engineering school. I was like, okay, well, how can I do this? And so I got on YouTube, went to YouTube University, figured out, okay, I'll make some sketches. Maybe I should look into filing a trademark on this name I've come up with. Maybe I should get a patent. Maybe I can write a patent. And I just start going through the process. And I remember when I finished my sketches, there was this story that it was top of mind for me about the founder of GoPro and how he was a surfer, knew nothing about engineering design. He wasn't an inventor, but he knew that when he went surfing around the world, he had no footage of him on the board. It was always from the shore, and it was a teeny tiny little dot. And he just wanted a camera that he could take with him and record while surfing. And so he went to Best Buy, got a little Sony cam. He went, got some acrylic, taped it all up, shipped it off to China, and said, "Hey, make this waterproof." And that's how GoPro was born. And so I just said, well, if he could do it, I can do it. And so I sent my designs, made a little prototype, sent it off to some factories in China, and the rest was off to the races. And since I didn't want to use all my savings to build the business, I decided on Kickstarter. And so I used a little bit of money to develop a video and a launch campaign and a web page and all that kind of stuff, and ultimately launched it and raised about $15,000 to start the business.
So you taught yourself to write a patent and trademarks and designed prototypes from paper and tape. So how did you learn how to write a patent on your own? This is no guidance. This is totally on your own, right?
Well, YouTube, I literally watched like three videos of people with varying level of sophistication of what you need to do to write a provisional patent. And so, I made my sketches, I just took pictures and then traced them of my little prototype that I made. And ultimately, I just followed the directions. And what gave me a lot of comfort and what I tell a lot of people when they're writing their own patents is that, the provisional patent is really just a bookmark. It doesn't need to be, it needs to be decently robust, but nothing compared to non-provisional. And so, once I wrote it, fast forward a couple years later when we're going through the non-provisional process, to my surprise, when I finally hired attorneys, they were like, Akeem, this provisional is actually really good. Like all of your claims, we're gonna pretty much submit as you wrote them. And out of the, I want to say I had maybe 24 claims or something, 21 claims that I had submitted, and we ended up getting like we'll say 17. It was really close to what I initially submitted, and we ended up doing continuations in part, which was not me. That was my attorneys that kind of, got it, more robust as we developed new products and had add-on features and protections that we wanted. But yeah, I mean, to me, it was honestly a much easier process than I thought. And funny story, Bruce, real quick. So at the time, I was dating someone who was in law school, and I was like, "Hey, can you write this patent for me? You law classes, you figure this out." They're like, "No, I can't. I'm not ready to do this. I can't do this." No, and so that's what made me was like, you know what, forget it. I'll just look it up on YouTube because I didn't have the money to spend on the patent. So, it just goes to show you, you can do what you put your mind to.
Yeah, I love it. It's so American and it's so, it's what the patent system is supposed to be about. I mean, it's not just going through the priesthood to speak to the gods. A patent attorney once said to me that that's really what the system is. And even other lawyers are intimidated dealing with patents. But that's great. That's really wonderful. But you were dealing with an existing adhesive, which NASA, I assume, owned. So did you have to license that from them, or how did that work?
So what's really interesting about NASA technologies, it generally falls into two categories when it comes to IP. It is their IP, but the vast majority of IP that NASA creates is actually open to the American public. So you can go to NASA's website today. They have a huge database of research papers and all of this intellectual property that's out there that you can use. And when you think about like polycarbonate plastics, almost every plastic we have, up until recently was all developed at NASA and to go to space. When you look at, from microwaves to memory foam, mattresses and pillows, all this stuff was freely available for the American public and entrepreneurs and businesses to take and develop into products. The other side of it is what you need to develop rockets. And that has very, very high licensing fees. So they license that. It's pretty expensive to license some of that stuff. But a lot of it, the non-rocket science part of it is generally open to the public. And so, I remember being a kid and people saying, "Oh, why is NASA spending all this money? They're just playing with toys going to space." And I don't think a lot of people realize the amount of technologies that we get from, when human beings do impossible things, they have to invent things that just never existed before. And so we, especially entrepreneurs in America, really benefit from that endeavor. And funny enough, Bruce, I think it was maybe a week ago or 2 weeks ago, NASA actually published an article about me taking their technology, bringing it over to the consumer market.
It's certainly a success story for them on multiple levels, not just about getting to space. Growing up, you had some challenges. You suffered from anxiety you had written about and depression, but were unaware of it. It wasn't until you took a leave of absence from work and you actually checked into a psychiatric facility that you began your battle with mental health. Tell us a little bit about that. How did you recognize that and what form did it take?
So I was at Verizon, and here I was. I had just won that competition, right? The Rockstar competition. I should be on top of the world. Like I was feeling great. I'm like, I've got this money saved up. I'm no longer this failure college dropout anymore. And it was Thanksgiving. I was dog sitting for my uncle who was out of town, and not the same uncle that did the NASA thing, a different uncle. And I just had dinner with my father, and I was just alone, and I was watching a video, Liam Neeson video, and at the beginning of this movie, he's like, when you die, it's not your life that flashes before your eyes, but it's the remembering of all the regrets that you have. And this overwhelming sense of anxiety comes over me, like I had never felt my entire life, where it's just gonna be all this regret, that would happen. And I could not shake it for hours. I'm feeling this pit in my stomach. And I remember thinking that night, I had never contemplated suicide in my entire life. And even in that moment, I wouldn't say I was. But what I did feel is I'm like, I think this is anxiety. And if I felt like this every day for 10 years, I don't think I could go on. And so when I woke up the next day, I was fine for about 30 seconds before it hit me again. And then all day, anxiety. And then the next day and the next day. And eventually it leads to massive insomnia. I didn't sleep for nearly a week. I would just sit at night, eyes closed, just could not sleep. And I was really not doing well. And I was very fortunate at the time to have a manager at Verizon that was my friend and worked with him at Sprint, now T-Mobile. And he had just gone through a mental episode. And so he was like, here's my therapist. You need to go see her. Something's wrong with you. And man, his ability to see that, because here I was, a top salesperson, not hitting my numbers. And he could have went and said, oh, Akeem, you need to get your numbers together, aren't you? But he realized it was something else. And I'm incredibly grateful for him for that. And so as you started going to therapy, I remember the first therapy session. This is the first one I ever had in my life. I go in, I'm like, yeah, I'm just stressed at work. I think I need some time off. And at the end of this hour-long session, I'm just like, oh, by the way, I'm gay. No one knows, never told anybody. But anyway, yeah, it's mostly work stress. So if you could just write me a note, a script or something. And so then, the insomnia happens. I go back and really for me, it was dealing with the fact that I had never really acknowledged or accepted or faced, my sexuality, that I was gay and I was moving through the world with this mask on, wanting everyone to like me all the time, being afraid that if people knew the truth about me, they wouldn't like me. I wouldn't be in sales. I wouldn't be able to do anything. I wouldn't have friends. And so it was just this incredibly difficult time. And in order for me to get, leave from work, I had to actually be, I wouldn't say committed, but, I had to go to a psychiatrist. And yeah, I ended up going to this facility where I had to show up every day, group therapy. And honestly, it was absolutely worth it for me because I started to understand, and learn these tools, these coping mechanisms. But at the same time, I got a lot of medication. And what happened to me, and I'm not a doctor, so please don't take this as medical advice, but for me, what was very interesting was I was given all this medication, but I always felt like it was very situational. I'm like, if I can overcome my own internal, issues and live to be the person that I really am, I don't think I should need medication to balance my feelings. People have chemical imbalances, but I didn't think that was my case. And a few months after being on, mood stabilizers and lithium and all these drugs, I realized that I was dependent on them for my mood to be stable. And without them, even though I eventually came out the closet and I'm, feeling like I should be better, I was dependent on these drugs. And I remember that I was at Verizon. I won this another competition where I was like top 0.1% in the company. And they come around with this huge check, right? And they're singing and there's music. And this was like, it was over $10,000. And here's a kid who a couple years ago was making $10 an hour. And now I'm about to get a $10,000 check in one go bonus because I was like a top salesperson. And I get the check, and my coworker next to me, Brittany, turns to me and says, Akeem, you don't look like a person that just won $10,000. Like you're not even smiling. And that's when I knew something was off. Because now it wasn't that I was having anxiety, but I wasn't feeling anything. And so I ended up stopped taking the medicine and I really started to focus on, and then our anxiety came back, way worse than ever. But then I started learning and using the coping mechanisms I learned at that hospital, which was, meditation and taking time and breathing exercises and really reflecting on my life as a whole rather than worrying about the future, understanding like, wow, look how far I've come. And as I moved into entrepreneurship, when I was about to be on Shark Tank and got a notice from the patent office that I was getting a final rejection letter, and I was like, "Oh God, this is going to jeopardize everything." All these different ups and downs and turmoils that I faced building Flipstick. If it hadn't have been for me going through all of that and really feeling very low and recovering from it, I probably would have given up many, many times. But because I had come out of that deep depression and anxiety state, I knew that like I have the tools within me to do it again. And I don't have to let that stop me or paralyze me from moving forward for the rest of my life.
And you had succeeded, really pretty royally, and yet you still didn't feel good. And I think that probably that disconnection, why am I feel bad and I'm doing so well? That's sort of a lightning bolt. That's why a lot of celebrities, I think, are highly depressed.
Absolutely. Because, I think sometimes in our society, we don't take a holistic model and we don't understand like just because you're successful in one area of your life doesn't mean you're successful in all. It's like you may have financial success, but do you have relationship success? Do you have family success? Do you have health success? And if you neglect any part of that is important for you as a human being, ultimately you're not going to be fully.
You talk about being bullied at a young age. What were you bullied about, and how did you respond?
It was several things. And I couldn't really tell you why they were, why I was being bullied. But I remember, well, I can tell you one. I remember being in high school and I was a freshman on the football team. And you can see I still like to eat a little chunky in the face. And I was on the football team, and I had man boobs in high school, still do. I remember two of my teammates were like, "Oh, just show us your man boob. We just want to see him. We'll never ask you again if you just show it to us." And they were just like chastising me again and again. And I just felt so self-conscious about my body, which I think a lot of kids do at that age, boys and girls. And I just felt so self-conscious. It was just so harassing. And it was at the time, it was just so traumatizing for me. And I never told anyone, about this until I finally went to therapy years later. And I was already very self-conscious about, being overweight as a kid, but especially because, here I had, these pecs that poked out through my shirt. And it was just it felt very embarrassing as a kid. And not to mention, deep down, buried down deep, I'm thinking, I definitely don't want anybody here to know that I'm gay. And I was at an all boys school on top of all of it. So it was just, it was things like that. I remember getting to a fight in middle school. And, whether it was because I was the black kid in school or because I was the kid that was, or when I was at a school that was majority black. Oh, well, you don't listen to the same music that we listen to.
You're not black enough, right?
Yeah, you're either too black, you're not black enough, you're this, you're that, it was always something, you know what I'm saying? It's like, oh, you're too, why are you in the robotics club? It's always something with kids. They'll find something about anybody for any reason. And so I just felt I was not a confident person. And I think for me, one of the things that I really appreciate about getting in sales, and I knew this even as a kid about myself, I always just loved to talk. And like my talking was always my superpower because when I would start talking, people would start listening. And it's never really about, the way I looked or anything. People just like listening to me talk. So whether it was selling calendars or pizzas or cookies or whatever it was for school, or when I had my lemonade stand, like it gave me this sense of accomplishment to talk to people and have them buy into whatever it is I was saying. And so once I actually got into sales as a career, that really, kind of showed that to me.
Yeah, it's kind of coping mechanism. Probably if you spoke, they didn't scrutinize you. You said pursuing your dreams, Akeem, was as important as medication. And you do talk about how that focus and sense that you're building something and moving towards something was really helpful. What did that mean to you when you didn't have as much success as you would thought you might? Say with Flipstick, the company did 10 million, I think, at one point, or over 10 million in sales, but it hasn't fared so well ultimately. So how do you deal with that?
It was tough, Bruce. It was so tough. So yeah, at the end of last year, we had to make the tough decision to shut down the business. And it wasn't a profitable business. We were able to scale it. It was profitable when I started it, when we were small, before we took on any investors and we're doing lots of advertising. But it wasn't a sellable business either, being so small.
And it's also about you, the business, more than anything, which is nice for your ego, but kind of a mistake for value, for valuation.
And honestly, even as we scaled, it was still about me. And what I realized, was that our superpower was my ability to go into a room and tell a story about either the founding of the company, the mission of the company, or our customers, and to have people buy in to what it is I was saying. And so when we went into big box retailers like Target and Best Buy and AT&T and T-Mobile and all these big people, they would, even though we were tiny, we probably didn't deserve a shot, they would give us this opportunity. They would put us in retail. They placed big orders with us. And so this happened again and again and again, but it was really, it masked, and it even masked it from me as well, that the product did not stand on its own. It needed me. People bought it because of me, not because of the product by itself. And so when it's in the store and you've never heard of Akeem and you've never seen a pitch and you've never watched Shark Tank and I'm totally removed from it, it made it a much more difficult sell for. And don't get me wrong, we had great customer ambassadors that would promote the product and love the product, and when they talked about it, people would buy it too. But it was not something that stood on its own. It really required a story to be sold, and in today's attention economy, that's very difficult. And so when I was just at the end of last year really facing the fact that I wasn't going to be able to sell the business for tens of millions of dollars and retire and go to a beach somewhere. It was devastating, because Flipstick really has been my identity and given me so much success and opportunity, and it really has been an amazing journey. And so I felt like a failure. And I remember I was talking to a mentor of mine, and I've been asked to come and speak at a number of events. I wasn't really charging money at the time, but I've been asked to speak at some events. And the mentor was like, you need to start charging real money to speak. And I was like, how can I charge real money to speak? I didn't sell my company for $100 million. I'm not qualified to speak. And he's like, Akeem, you are not a fraud. It's like you have done something that 99.8% of entrepreneurs will never do. And it's like, yeah, you may not have done what 0.1% do, but you've done more than the vast majority of people will do. And that information is valuable to people. You should start charging. And honestly, it gave me a sense of comfort. In the past, I would probably have gone into a depression for a long time. I would have taken probably a year to recover. But literally, I mean, it was a couple months. I felt sorry for myself for probably a month or so. And then I got to work. And to my surprise, as we began the beginning of this year, I'm sending emails out, reaching out to people, and I start getting hired to come speak at events for big organizations, for big conferences like South by Southwest, and people want to come hear me. And here's what I didn't understand. There was obviously a lot of value in the story of Flipstick and the lessons that I learned, but really what it was for me when I was speaking, and everyone keeps telling me, it's like, it's just about your energy in the room. The way you say it is almost more important than what you're saying. And so when you're saying it, I'm actually listening and receiving it and ready to apply it. Whereas if someone else has said basically the same stuff, I may not feel the same way when I walked out the room. And that's when that true light bulb moment went off for me, where I was like, oh, this was also our greatest strength, but greatest weakness at Flipstick is that, yeah, if people were buying it because I'm saying it. At the time, they were buying Flipsticks, but now they're buying the fact that I can start a business. I can scale my business. I can use my own stories and my own customer stories to grow and build our organization. And for me, it was just this kind of aha moment. It was fun because it's like, man, this is the stuff that I love to do. My favorite part of building Flipstick was always, flying to LA and being at an event where I didn't know anybody, but convincing myself I'm gonna get Snoop Dogg to back me up and to see my product and to help me out. Like that was what really like kind of lit my fire, was just the having to go and make shit happen. I loved it. I loved that part of building the business. And so now, as I get to travel around the country speaking and teaching people how you do this. I don't know everything about business, but there's some things that I know and I probably know better than most. And that's really how you take a story and you build it into something that gives people the feeling that, hey, I should just give this person more time. I should listen to this person. I should take a chance on this person. I want to be a part of this person's story. I want to be a part of this company's story, this brand's story.
People hear you. When they listen to you, they really listen. And you can help others convey that quality, I think is what you're saying, which is very endearing and really important. I mean, you could be an investment banker, you can go to Hollywood. If you got a good rap, people like it. They listen. And today more than ever with attention spans, we were talking about that before we started recording. With attention spans as limited as they are, reaching people with words is really important and unique. You literally, Akeem, rapped your way on stage when you impressed OG, that's the original gangsta, Snoop, who helped you land on Shark Tank. Tell us a little bit about how that happened.
Yeah, so I will say this because we know P. Diddy's been a little trouble lately. This was prior to all that. But what happened was I failed to make it on the Shark Tank, right? And I'm like, okay, I need another celebrity investor. And Diddy was having this event in Atlanta that was a music conference, but he was gonna have a pitch competition for small businesses. So I said, okay, I'm gonna go, I'm gonna pitch, I win the pitch competition. I think it was like 10K that I was to get for the pitch competition. I was like, and ultimately my goal was to get an investment. And turns out pitch competition is closed, but Akeem has already bought in the plane ticket and the hotel and all this stuff. And so I go anyway and I say, okay, there's a music competition to win a record deal. I'm going to write a rap and I will rap a pitch about my business Flipstick and win the record deal in order to invest into my company Flipstick. Absolutely insane plan. But I go, I perform the rap, I get to the top 5 in the competition. I'm going to be able to get on stage in front of DJ Khaled and Timberland and all these incredible celebrity judges to win this record deal. And I get disqualified because they say, Keem, you're not a real rapper. This is for real artists. And I just knew I was like, look, I cannot, I'm here for a reason. And at that time, I was just so like my mental strength at that time, my life was so strong. I was just like, look, this is meant for me and I'm going to make it happen. And so, right before the final music competition was a comedy show, and the comedian's on stage, he's cracking jokes, and I just stand up, hold my product in the air. He looks at me, and in very colorful language that I won't repeat here, he's like, man, what are you trying to sell me? And I just go in full pitch mode. I'm telling him, oh, you can stick it to different surfaces. It lets you make videos. He starts cracking jokes about the product and all the inappropriate places he'd like to stick it and record things. And the crowd is just eating it up. The whole show gets derailed, and eventually he lets me on the stage to perform my rap during his show, during his set. Crowd loves it, and the same people that disqualified me ended up introducing me to the executives at Combs organization. AT&T was the sponsor of the event. I end up meeting those guys, and they end up buying a ton of flip sticks, having me come out to LA to their next event. And at that event, I knew Snoop was going to be there, so I made a flip stick with his face on it, and he was taking questions at his segment. And he was taking questions. There was a whole bunch of celebrities on stage. They're all talking about cannabis and the business of cannabis. Surprising that there's like one more question was going to be asked, and I was one person away from asking a question. And I was like, I just have to get his attention. So I took my phone, I stuck it on the wall behind the girl in front of me asking a question. And there's video footage of this, so people can go see this stuff out on the internet. And Snoop is just looking, and you could tell he was high because he's like, that mofo just stuck his mofo phone on the wall, right into the mic while this girl's trying to ask her a question. And everyone is like, what's Snoop talking about? He must be really, really high right now. He's hallucinating. And he's like, no, that man just stuck his phone on the wall. I want to hear about that sticky phone. About that sticky phone. And he just starts going off, and they're trying to haul him off the stage. And they're like, all right, the show is over. They're cueing the music. And he's like, no, turn the music off. Get me that sticky phone up here. That man's trying to get his invention off. I want to hear about the invention. That invention could change the world. And he invites me up to the stage and he sees his face on. He's like, this man's a branding genius.
And you had never met him before or anything.
I'd never met Snoop in my life. I was so grateful for him. We ended up going backstage and man, it was just this, and he's just very encouraging. He's like, man, you got this. You need to talk to so and so. And it was just this incredible moment. It ended up going viral. AT&T was there. I ended up talking to AT&T, and one of the executives who was there from AT&T ended up eventually becoming an investor. And it was just this extraordinary, like, impossible moment to happen. And here's the funny thing. So at that pitch competition that I never entered, right? One of the judges was a casting director for Shark Tank. And I caused so much commotion at these two events that they're just like, yeah, man. And then he did this. And then he got on the stage at the comedy show. And then he's in LA and then Snoop is tripping off of it and he's derailing the whole thing. And so this casting director who's in the meetings behind the scenes of all these events ends up calling me up is like, hey, you need to come audition for Shark Tank. He's like, we're gonna be in Kansas City. I want you to come. It's tomorrow. I go audition, and it was pretty much a formality at that point because he's told everybody at Shark Tank what's been going on.
Did he know you had a history with Shark Tank before?
No, he had no idea. He had no idea. And so when I told them that, they're like, what? You had applied? And it was just this, once again, the product didn't change, but the story had changed. And all of a sudden, it was this great American, story. And at the end of the day, people buy stories. People want to be a part of great stories. And so when people look up the Shark Tank episode, they'll see I come out and I'm rapping. And that rap is very similar to the rap that, ultimately got me in front of Snoop. And so, yeah, I mean, it was really a crazy journey. And what I'm finding now, and we talked about it a little bit offline, is I get that same feeling again. As I'm building, my speaking career and I'm traveling, I love just being in a place, not really having an intro or an opportunity like that was set out at the beginning, but just figuring it out and making it happen. And man, I love it.
We're running a little bit low on time. This has been wonderful, Akeem. Are you still inventing? And what areas interest you these days?
So I am inventing. It's a little different. I'm not doing a product right now. As I was exiting Flipstick, I had to think about, okay, what am I going to do next? And I have a lot of ideas, as most inventors do. But I did want to focus on this journey of my life of being able to speak. And so some of the things I'm working on right now is developing a framework for people who aren't great at storytelling, who may be great practitioners, inventors, business owners, service providers, but aren't great at telling their own story. How can I take that special sauce that I've created and transfer it, make it easily transferable to other people? So that's a piece that I'm working on now. I'm also doing some stuff with AI. I actually just talked with NVIDIA recently and saying, okay, how can we use AI to help people tell their story when they may not be able to formulate it in those ways? So I think that's going to be really exciting. So there are some pretty fun stuff that I'm working on, even if it may not be, a product at the moment.
They could scrape your brain, but not your heart, right?
That's exactly right.
What would you advise newcomers today to inventing and to entrepreneurship?
One, take the first step and then take the next step. I think a lot of people get so overwhelmed by the end goal that they don't take the little steps in between. And you got to take a first step on any journey and you got to keep taking one step at a time. And so I ask myself each day, what's something that I can start and finish today to get me closer to the end goal? And that's a success and a win. So I think taking little steps, creating small, achievable goals will help you from becoming overwhelmed at the enormity of what it is you may be trying to accomplish, especially if it's a big dream. And I'm a big dreamer. I love dreaming big. So I think that's number one. I think number two is don't give up too soon. I found in my life, one of my favorite motivational speakers is Jim Rohn, old school guy. And, he talks about how he's like, imagine being a farmer and it's spring and it's summer and you're harvesting and you're growing all this food and it's just great and it just feels amazing. And then winter comes and all the crops are dead. Imagine if you did not know that after winter comes spring and you were just like, we're done. I need to shut down the farm. We need to move on. And we all know that after winter comes spring. But in life, sometimes we don't realize that. And we don't realize that after summer comes winter. And so it's this roller coaster that's always going to be seasons through your lives of ups and downs. But it's very important that you don't quit in those winters and instead you prepare for the spring and the summer and the fall harvest. And understand that after your big harvest, you're probably going to hit winter again. It's just a pattern of life. And so I've learned like, hey, you don't give up, especially when you're down, because it's when you're at your lowest, when you're coming down, you're falling and you're coming down that roller coaster hill. That's the momentum that pushes you up to the next newest heights. So don't give up at the wrong time. The other thing I will say is, look, if you got an idea, make sure you protect it. Because as we scaled the business, when we were starting to look for international distributors, retail placement, if we did not have intellectual property protection, most of those deals wouldn't have happened. Like people could have easily ripped us off. Now, don't get me wrong, we still got ripped off, but none of the none of the big players are going to take the rip-offs because it's just not worth getting into the lawsuit. It's just easier for them to just partner with you. They take 50% of the sale. That's so much easier for them. But if you have no protection, they have no protection. And so they don't want to sell a more expensive product. So for if I'm sure most of the people who are listening to this understand the value of protecting your intellectual property, but I would just encourage that. And not just for patents either. Also for trademarks, because your name is one of the most powerful things that you own. Recently we saw the death of famous Amos, the guy who created, one of the most famous cookies in the world. And a lot of people don't know that when he sold that company, he sold his name. And so he was never able to create another cookie and put his name on it. So he would have to go around and sell cookies and not even say who he was because his name was Amos. And now that was owned by another company. So just remember that, a name can be just as or more powerful sometimes than the actual intellectual property that backs up the product or service that you make.
Than the patents. Sure, sure. Well, that's great. This is fantastic. And we'll have to have you on again. I'm sure there's a lot more we can talk about, but this has been great. I thank you for your time. It's just a Saturday. It's hard to catch you. You just came back from a week of speaking in the Bay Area, I know. And thanks for fitting us in. I really appreciate it. And so do our listeners.
Thank you so much for having me, Bruce.
Understanding IP Matters is brought to you by the nonprofit Center for Intellectual Property Understanding with the generous support of its partners and sponsors. Gain access to all 4 seasons by subscribing for free on your favorite platform or email us at explore.understandingip.org. Content conveyed is for informational purposes only and does not represent the views of CIPU or its affiliates. This episode was produced by Jack Shields for Wild Creek Studios. Thank you for listening.